Attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, hello. This is Stephen from Ventuz. Today I will present you this webinar, and I will talk about Ventuz in general. So I will give you a rough overview about our software suite, and so that you can start to inform yourself a little bit more. So now I think we should just wait some minutes more for some more attendees. I think 5:05 would be a good starting time, so we can all just relax a little bit more and then start in 2 or 3 minutes with this webinar. I will already tell this, so in the end, this webinar will be around 1 hour, and from 6 p.m. I think we will start a question and answer session. So if there are any questions that pop up during the webinar, just post them as a question to the staff, and then in the end we will try to answer most of them all. So let's just wait for some more time. Okay, so there are still some people joining us. I think everyone who wants to see the webinar will now have joined by now. Well, so this webinar will be about an overview of our software, so that you have an idea of how to work with Ventuz, what you can achieve with Ventuz, when to use it, and all that. For this I will give you a rough overview of our philosophy. So what are the general goals of Ventuz, what is the concept behind the software suite and all that, what is the basic license model. Then we will jump into the Ventuz Designer, which is the content creation software of our software suite, and we will have a look at the basic concepts of the design and how to work with it, because for example the designer is node-based, and we will have a look at how to work with those nodes in the end. Lastly, we will have a look at the deployment options, because there are several options of how you can deploy your project or your presentation, and this will be about the Ventuz Runtime, which is the second software, and the Ventuz Director, which is a control software or third software in the suite. And then we will have a look at how to configure, well, a very short look at how to configure all your machines so that you can adjust them for your special application. So to start, we will first have a look at all the solutions that we offer with our software suite, which you can see at our website at ventuz.com. So basically Ventuz is a toolbox rather than a specific software that offers a specific solutions, but it is more a set of a whole tool set, a set of tools that you can use and combine to use it in your specific application. So basically you can achieve anything with Ventuz that you can think of, just to be a little bit aggressive with the claims. But we have some focuses of applications or branches and markets that we focus on, and that will be very easy to implement and very fast to implement, because we focus on the workflows there and on the features so that you have everything that you need for those. Nevertheless, you can even achieve more than you just see here. But let's have a look at what are the main markets for Ventuz. So as you can see, you can divide this or break that down to 5 markets, which is first video walls and very flexible outputs, which means that you don't, it's not only that you can display your project that you created with Ventuz on one single machine that outputs on a big LED walls, for example, but you can also cluster different machines all together to drive really high resolution setups. So this is about the flexibility of your output possibilities. The second one is because Ventuz is a real-time software, so we're not talking about linear outputs or linear deployment, for example a video. We're talking about real presentation that offer also interactivity. So to implement multi-touch in software presentations is as much as adding one more node in your presentation. So it is very easy and very streamlined and very intuitive to get multi-touch to work in Ventuz. The next one is that we also have a focus on the broadcast market, which means that we can not only have on-air graphics that you can then play out on SDI machines, for example, but you can also have in-studio graphics like a video wall for your studio, or a touch screen, a big one for your presenter. And additionally, you can also control all that with our control application, which is the Ventuz Director, from just one point, which would most likely be in your control room of your studio. So much for broadcast. We also have the presentations market. So still, it is still real time. We don't have just slides that you can linearly put together in one single order, but you can also create any interaction that you would like for your presentation. So for example, a tree structure to get from one product to another and explain those in details before going to the next product and going up again in the structure. So you can just structure your presentation however you need it for being astonishing for your visitors, which is very interesting also if you work for corporations. And the last one is very similar to the first one. So we not only offer clustering options, video wall options, or high resolutions, but we also have the possibility to use projection mappings, which are very complex and very specific, and we have a tool that is easy to use to set up those projection mappings. So those are the 5 main focuses that we are most of the time working on. So for example, in the broadcast markets, we are also talking about tracking for making virtual reality studios, for example. So those are all easy to implement, and what's more is that they are all easy to combine. So for example, you can easily create a video wall that is also touchable, or as you can see with the presentations, you can also easily build presentations that are somehow interactive, or you can build this presentation for your in-studio application or whatever you like. So there's a focus also on making all the tools combinable for the application that you need. Well, so much for the tool for the solutions. Let's now have a look at the tools that we offer, which is our software suite, which is very slim because it only consists of 3 softwares, which is starting with the Ventuz Designer. So whenever you want to create your content, you will most likely start with the designer to build all your content and composite all your 3D assets, your data, and create the logic to make it work with, for example, interaction, or make it accessible from remote machines, just for example. So the Ventuz Designer basically will be the software where you're most of the time working in. And this is also why this piece of software will be the focus of this webinar as well. The second software is, well, let's see, the Ventuz Runtime. So whenever you're done with your project and you want to start presenting it on your specific occasion, you will most likely use the Ventuz Runtime for this. In the end, you can deploy your scenes that you build in your project as a Ventuz presentation that can then be played out as a as a presentation in the Ventuz Runtime. So this runtime either will just be played also as a standalone application, or you can instead also remote control it, either with your own application, or you can use the Ventuz Director that we offer as well, which is just a very simple control application, but as you can already see in these 2 pictures, has a very simple user interface that is easy to learn and very fast to use. So the Director uses a template-based workflow. You just create in your designer ready-to-use graphics that only need some more data to work. For example, if you have a lower third, you just build the graphics in the designer, and once you play it out with the Director, you just need to add the top line and the bottom line, for example. If you don't want to do this on showtime, you can still create pages and your own rundowns so that you can plan your show beforehand, like you used to probably in the broadcast markets. Well, this is it about our 3 products. Now let's take a look at how to exactly work with those, because the workflow is very easy, but it might need some explanation. I already talked a little bit about it. So whenever you work with Ventuz, you will always start with the designer, create your project in the designer, and then whenever you're done, you can either play it out as a presentation that you can then run with a runtime, and this will then be a standalone application. Users can, for example, interact with it or whatever, but you won't control it from outside. If you want to control it, you can just play the project in the runtime and control the project using the Director. Instead of the Director, you can of course use any other control software, even your own, that supports the network interfaces that we offer. So much for the workflow and our products. Let's have a very quick look at the licenses, which might also be very interesting for you. This is just the basic concept, so whenever you have more detailed questions on those, or you need just generally more details on the licenses, you can just drop a line for sales@ventuz.com. They will then just give you a better overview or can answer your questions more detailed. So basically, there are 3 products which you will all need a license for, which is the runtime, the design, and the Director, as we've seen them before. And they are all standalone licenses, so you can buy 1 runtime, 1 designer, and 1 Director. The only exception to that is that you can, whenever you buy a designer, you will also automatically get a runtime as well as with a Director. Whenever you buy a Director, you will also get a runtime license. And by default, all these three options contain a license for GPU output so that you can output on your graphics cards. And if you'd like to, you can add options to those like single SDI, dual SDI, or the same for NDI. And that's basically it. As I said, more details can be gotten from sales@ventuz.com. I think this is it for the licenses. I also think that we've covered the basic philosophy of the Ventuz Software Suite, and would now like to jump into the designer with you and have a very rough overview of how to work with the designer and how to start your project, and in the end how to deploy it. So this is the designer that you've seen in the beginning as well. Now this view is the design view, which is basically the easiest view that you can have in the Ventuz designer. We have three more views of this, which is the logic view, the animation, and the data view, which all give you access to different points of working structure to your project. So the design view is the easiest one. You only have a renderer window and a layer editor. The layer editor is there for 2D compositing, so that you in the end have one texture for each layer, and in here you can tell it how to blend it together. And the renderer window will just show you whatever you will see in the runtime when you deploy it as a presentation. Just exactly whatever you see there, you will see in the renderer. So Ventuz is, the designer is definitely a what you see is what you get software. So when it looks wrong here, it will most likely also look wrong in the runtime. Well, as I said, you can have the layers blend differently, or like you are used to when you're working with 2D compositing software like Photoshop. So first, for example, you can change the blending modes to, let's say, multiply. So now you can see that it's actually multiplying. Let's change it to screen so it gets a little bit more visible. And here you can already see that this is like you would expect it to work in, for example, Photoshop as well. So those are the blending modes. Additionally, you can add real-time post-processing effects as well. So we have layer effects, which can, for example, blur the whole layer. So as you can see, we have one layer for the logos and one for the backgrounds, and right now I am just blurring the logos. Now to add a new layer, we can use a small button up here. We can, for example, add a 2D layer, and you can already see that this is rendered on top of all the other layers, so you can change the order of the layers and how they should be blended together up here. And like with any other layer, you can also change the blending mode of this, for example, to multiply, to make different effects, like you would in a 2D compositing software. So let's delete this color layer and add a more complex layer, for example our Photoshop layer, with which you can, for example, just import a PSD, which will then take over all the layers that you have created in your PSD file as well, with all the blending modes and all the textures that you have in there. So in here we have now a background layer. If we delete that, you can already see that this is just used as a lower third. And like with any other layers, you can also apply effects and blendings to those as well. Well, easy as that. So this should be it about the 2D layers. Now let's take a look at what is happening if we don't want to only composite 2D wise but also 3D wise. How can we build 3D scenes which is by just adding a 3D layer. And as soon as you click, for example, this pencil icon here and jump to the logic view, you can see that we can now work with two more editors, which is the hierarchy and the content editor, to adjust a 3D scene. Let's not work in this one here, but let's just use another scene for that, because this looks a little bit more flexible and easier to look good. So in here in this scene we have one 3D layer, which has just a node that I built for myself, which consists of several other nodes like this, which holds a camera, lighting and all that, to make things after this look a little bit better. So to work with the hierarchy editor means that you will tell the renderer directly what it has to do in the next step. So for example, you can add a geometry to it, like a generic torus. So we have very generic geometries where you can just change, for example, the size or the tube size, and you can place, for example, an axis in front of a geometry to tell the renderer that the position should change for that one, and change the scaling and the position like that, so that we now have a big torus that was scaled by an axis. This is basically it for the hierarchy. So like in any other software, also the hierarchy works like every node is affecting every child node. So when we add one more cube, the axis will also be applied to this cube that you can see here, and if you place the cube not behind the axis but below it, it will not be applied, because the axis will only affect every node that is behind it. So this is just like every other 3D software should work as well. The second editor is the content editor, which goes hand in hand with the properties editor that we already used for changing the values of this axis, which is over here. So the content editor can be used to create your logic networks. So you can apply several variables to several variables of other nodes. So every node has inputs and outputs. And you can, for example, let's say generate values to make the torus rotate around the y-axis by changing the y rotation over time. For this task, the mover is just a perfect choice. We can just use a preset that is using a rotation like generating values between 0 and 360, so that it will just generate values between those two limits in the given duration, which you can change to 5, and now in the time of 5 it will count down from 360 to 0. And we can just apply this to our y rotation by dragging and dropping the property name of the axis onto the node that we want it to be connected to. And this is basically it, what you need to do to build your logics. We can now go a little bit further. For example, we cannot tell the mover to rotate all the time, but rather use a touch for this. So we won't want the torus to only rotate around the axis once whenever we touch it. As said before, adding interaction is almost like adding one more node. So we can search for a touch button, add it in front of the axis. And now we need to change the mode of the mover, which would be from absolute, which just rotates all the time, to one shot, which only rotates whenever we use the nudge method, which is also an input. So let's not make it 5 seconds again, but rather 1. And the method can be fired by any event that occurs on any other node. So for example, the touch button has events as outputs whenever we touch it. So the touch button listens to every geometry that lies behind it, and whenever we, for example, enter the touch in the geometry or touch it, you can see that some events down here fire. For example, the single tap event, which we can now use for our nudge method of the mover. So now, whenever I fire the touch button single tap event by tapping the torus itself, it will rotate once around the own y-axis. And this is it about adding interaction. What you can do is not only use this very generic animation, but you can also use a more complex one. For example, we can build a keyframe animation. To do this, we go to the animate view and not the logic view anymore. And now we have an animation editor on the bottom of our user interface. Here you have a timeline like you would know it from any other software as well. So for example, you can see our value curve. What I built here was just a very easy rotation around the y-axis again. So here you can see the current value, and when I scrub along the line, you can see that in the first keyframe it is 0, in the second one it's 120, and the third one is 240, and then it's going up to 360 and back to 0 again to create an animation that goes just from 0 to 120 to 240 and back to 0. So now how we build this is not using like a scrubber above the timeline, but rather a state logic, which is a second Ventuz specific feature, which means that you don't only have the timeline to control the animation, which you can scrub along, but you also have a state logic. So you can create one or more states which will tell the scene which keyframes should be active when we are in a specific state of the scene. So for example, in state 1 we have the rotation y set to 0, in state 2 it's 120, and in state 3 it's 240. And now with the state logic we can create transitions between those. For example, a transition between S1 and S2 is defined as the specific slice between S1 and S2 keyframes on our timeline. So before we worked on this big timeline, and this simple and small part of the animation between S1 and S2 is the animation that the state logic should drive when trying to go from S1 to S2. The same goes for the other transitions. So for example, we have a transition from S2 to S3, which is defined here, and from S3 to S1 again, which is defined in here as well. So what we did now was also add events and methods to be able to trigger those in order to rotate the torus or use the transitions of the animation to get from one state to another. So whenever you're in state 2 and I trigger the S1 method, it will always go to state S1 using the transition between those two. The same goes for the S3 method, which will always go to state S3, and for S2 as well. So now what we did was basically the same as we did with the mover before, but we did not bind a nudge method of the mover, but more those three methods that we created here to those three buttons that are all connected to a touch button. So this is basically it, how you can scale your animations and your logics so that you build some more complex, for example, this could be used for a turntable. So when you have a turntable and you have different interesting points of view around the turntable, you can just create all the states that you need to go from one interesting point to another using a keyframe animation and the state logic. Well, so much for animations and interaction. Now let's have a very quick look at how to drive real-time data. For this we have just as an example, there are some very simple hockey on-screen graphics. So when I go in here, let's go back to the logic view, and as soon as I drive those, you can see that it's using some more or less real-time data of a player. So for example, you can see his name, where he lives, his position in the team, his goals, assists, and his points in the team. So whenever something in there changes, all this is not static in the scene, but you would like to access it also during showtime, for example. So all this data is gotten from an XML file. You can also use an Excel file, a text file, you can use a database, you can use JSON objects gotten from, for example, social networks to display posts on Facebook or Twitter tweets or something. But this data is gotten from an XML file, which you can see here. So it's called team data. This is a rather simple XML file which consists of several teams, and here you can already see the first player of our first team is Evgeny Stamkos, and we can change it to, let's just say, new name, and as soon as we have changed that, well, let's retake this. Perfect. Probably it's using another name. Well, let's see. So let's change it back to make sure. Well, perfect. Well, actually it should work, but let's have a look at that. Note. Seems to be a bug in the current version. Well, let's see. Come on. Now it seems to work, which is pretty funny. No. Well, let's see about that. So normally it will just update once we have the auto update button checked. So probably there's also something broken in the rest of the logic, because this scene is also very complex, but let's not care about that for now. So as we said, we can also use Excel files, you can also use text files, JSONs and all that to create your own real-time data logics and use them in any way you like them. So I think so much for real-time data, for generic geometries and interaction. Now, what if we don't want to use those very simple geometries, but rather more complex one that we need to create with our 3D software? For this, we also support geometry imports. So you can just use the open scene dialog and move to your to be imported file, for example an FBX file. You also can use Collada files, whatever you like. from any software that you like to use, and for example import this very simple sphere stand. So now we can apply the materials on it, and we can change the lighting and all that, and then just insert it in our scene that we wanted. So for example in here, something like this to just make it look metallic. So here you go. The second way to do this is using our live link, which is possible to link to Cinema 4D instance that is currently running. And once you have installed Ventuz plugin, you are able to add some more tags to your objects in your Cinema 4D scene. So what I have open now is Cinema 4D with a version R16 or higher, so in my case R17, and you can see a very simple model of a NASCAR, not too much materials, and here you can see that we can add to our objects Ventuz tags, for example a setup tag or an object link tag. So the setup tag is just there to tell Ventuz later on where it should look for all the object links. So we can connect to this object which has the setup tag, and then in this object, which is again divided into body and internals, it will search for the object link tags, and in those tags you can define what to exactly send. So for example, you can send the transformation, the geometry, the material with the color, the luminance, specular and specular mask, and the texture for all those, and you can also use animations for that. So let's now just see how this would look like in Ventuz. So here we have a geometry import live node, which will with this button show you the currently running instance of Cinema 4D, and in here you have the setup tags that you can find in the currently open scene. So if I now click this car and click on the update button, it will generate the geometry for me. So this now looks very metallic in my scene. I have those more or less simple tiles, so I can now adjust everything that was not defined in my Cinema 4D scene. I can adjust over here, for example the specularity. Seems to be driven too high in my Cinema 4D scene, and I can just turn it down to make my NASCAR look good in the end. So one last tire and we're done. So now we have a Chrome-like looking NASCAR imported with our Cinema 4D live link. The cool thing is now that it has a live link to Cinema 4D. So let's just put the renderer here and open Cinema 4D and put it over there like this. And now whenever, for example, we move around one tire, we can, for example, move that tire here. You can see that it's also automatically doing the same on the Ventuz side, because all the vertices and materials and everything that you send will just be lively updated in Ventuz as well. So let's put this one back. Well, that's alright. So this is the second and more direct workflow that we thought of for Ventuz 5, so you can work rather directly between your 3D creation and the 3D compositing software. So much for the Cinema 4D Live link. Let's now have a very quick look for the HDR Engine, image-based lighting, material system, and what there are for 3D effects. So to have a look at this, we can just shortly see how the Nesca would look like in a properly prepared scene and not freshly imported from Cinema 4D. Let's just wait a second for it to load. So this is a whole scene that uses our material system, that uses some of our 3D effects, and also uses our HDR engine, which you can already see in the icon of our layer, and also uses image-based lighting. So let's jump in here, and here you can already see that through a Skybox we are defining a specular and irradiance cube map to create the lighting on our car, for example, which will be HDR textures, and uses the HDR engine to create physically more correct and easier to implement lighting, because image-based lighting obviously is always much easier than creating all the light sources on your own. So additionally to those effects, we also have in the layer effects of the 3D root node also use a bloom to make lighting appear even brighter. We use the HDR engine so we can change the exposure of our camera. We can also turn on a depth of field. We use an image-based lens flare, and those are basically those effects that we support. You can also use an ambient occlusion, which will be generated during real time, which is also screen space to make it more performant. And now you can see a readily built 3D scene that uses all the 3D effects that you can have in, or that you would probably need in a 3D scene. So now let's have a very quick look at the materials as well, and also see a little bit better example for the robot, for the Skybox and the IBL using this robot scene. So this is a very simple robot which just uses one Skybox, which has one irradiance and one reflection texture. And with the irradiance we just light the robot base color wise, and with a specular texture we will create those reflections on it and light it specular wise. Now additionally we created materials for this robot to change, for example, the base color. So you can see this on this left arm. Let's just put everything else away. So you have the left arm, and as soon as we disable the base color, you can see that this will be just applied to make it look more metallic and make it darker, to get the specularity that we need to make metallic materials. So next we have normal maps to add details in the lighting, also specular maps which will change the color of metal, which should also be a little bit darker to make it look a little bit rougher. And we also have a roughness map which will change how good our, or how well this will reflect. So if we turn down the roughness to 0, it will reflect pretty well, and when we turn it up to 1, it will not reflect at all. And so a roughness map just changes this detail on our material. So this is basically it for the material system. You can not only change the base color, the more normal map and all that, you can also change the lighting model. So for example, you can change to no lighting model, which will not apply any light at all. You can change to a Goro shading, which will not have specularity, and you can also use a very experimental incidence lighting. So the Phong lighting model is what will be physically most correct and which will be the most used material to create physically correct materials with HDR and IBL, like we had a look now. So additionally to those texture stages, you can add more material stages, for example displacement maps, or you can also use rim lighting that can also affect every channel, like it can not only be lighting our model, but it can also, for example, drop our roughness to create some Fresnel effect for glasses, for example. So this material system is again very flexible to create or to support your creativity in the materials that you need in the end. And well, I think this is it about the material system and also about how to generally work with a Ventuz designer. So you have had an insight into how to visually work with it, and how to work with the hierarchy, the content editor, how to work with the 2D compositing and the layers, how to blend layers, how to apply effects to all those, and also how to build your own logics using, for example, external data, or also interaction, for example. So what would be interesting for now is how to deploy all this for your end production. Let's just should have left the NASCAR scene open, so we can just load the NASCAR scene again, and then we can create a presentation of it, which will be a standalone presentation which has no interactivity and all that, but it looks pretty good. And in the end we will just have a Ventuz presentation file which can be deployed to any production machine that you want, and you only have to have a runtime license on that production machine, and then you can play it out as a standalone application, and If you have interaction in it, you can interact with it. You can also control it from outside using, for example, OSC commands. OSC is a network protocol which can be used to send commands or data from one application, from one control application to the running scene, or you can also use our remoting APIs. So in order to export all this as a Ventuz presentation, you can just go to Scene, Export, and tell it to export as a Ventuz presentation. It will ask you where to save this, and then also ask you which resources to include in the archive, and once you click OK, it will start packing. So now when we go to the location where it saved the presentation, we can just double click this to open the scene. Now the runtime opens. It will just take again some time to load. So now I just opened it in window view so that you can just see the presentation that we just created. So here you go, this is just the scene like we did see in the designer. So yes, it is definitely what you see is what you get software, so it's directly what you have seen in the design as well. If just playing out the presentation like we did before is not enough for you and you want to still control it once it is in the production mode, you can, for example, use the Ventuz Director to create a director show based on one project. So you can browse for projects in here and create shows based on those. You can create or open already existing shows. So we will have a look at the CI presentation to just have some small overview of what the director is capable of and how to use it. So this is the director interface. This is already a very overwhelming one because you have very different windows that you might not need in all the projects. So as told before, the director is a templates based engine. So you have templates that are predefined graphics that you just need to fill with data to make them represent the data that you want to have in real time. So for example, we have a template set of backgrounds which we can add to our background channel in the director, and then it will be played back in our background of the Ventuz presentation. Next, you, for example, can use a diagram for a content layer. You can just add it to the content channel. We can change, as told before, some of the data in here. So for example, we can drive one value really high to make the representation of it in, for example, the market of software really high. I don't know what this could represent. We can change the title to some other title, and as soon as we're ready with all that, we can just take this template on air, and now you can see in the preview of the program that it's actually showing all the data that we inserted correctly, and also the diagram is scaled correctly and all that. So if putting in all the data during runtime is not suitable for you because you have to plan all that beforehand, you can use pages. So for example, if you insert, for example, this pyramid bar chart and change some values of it, you can just click on the Create New Page button and create a page out of it. And now you can just again queue and take this from the pages. So we have some more beautiful one already created beforehand with a 3D pyramid bar chart, and you can see the results. So with those pages you can now create your own playlist for each of the channels, for example for content channel, and this way you can either create a rundown and still control it by hand, or you can use those durations to make them queue and take the according templates automatically. And that's basically it about the Ventuz Director. So as told before, the Director is able to not only control your local machine like I do now with this topology that you can see here, but you can also create more complex topologies using the topology editor. So you can add just more remote machines, for example a video wall consisting of 3 clustered machines, and another machine that is just, for example, outputting the broadcast on air graphics. And then you can create new channel slots that will then be used in the Director, like the background and the content channels, to make those all those machines independent or dependent from each other, like you need in your specific setup. So I think this is about the Director. So now that we're talking about configuring your machines and your topology, let's also take a look at how to configure your production machines in the end. Well, the Ventuz Software Suite is built so that everything will be creatable on your design machine, and you do not have to care about how the machine will be configured that will produce your presentation in the end. So you have virtual ordinals for audio and video inputs and outputs, and you don't, as a designer, you don't have to care about all that. You just need to, in the end, configure the production machine using this configuration editor that you can see here to fit the needs of your specific production. This also means that you can just create a presentation or project for one specific application, and you can configure your production machines according to that, and then suddenly you see that you could use the project as a base for a new project, and this is really no problem because you can just continue to design with a state of work that you had before the production, and then configure your new machines for the new application, and you don't have to change anything in the project if it's not related to the design concept or something. So this is the configuration editor. Here we can have a look at all 3 categories. So first we have the machine configuration in general. Here you can change everything that is related to interaction, remoting, and all culture settings, for example. So you can change the character sets that should be used. For example, the Chinese character sets are not used by default because loading all the Chinese characters during a startup will take a lot of time and will take up a lot of memory on your graphics and CPU memory. And this means if you do not use them, you don't need to tick them and they won't take any performance. So you can change the culture settings and all the like. So those are more general settings for your machine. And then we also have the audio-video configuration. In here you can decide what are your outputs and what are your inputs. So for example, you can add your GPU as an output, or you can add an NDI output, something like this. Or you can use NDI as an input, or whatever you like for your specific application now. So in here you can also change your audio devices, change which virtual ordinal of Ventuz should be mapped to which output, and this is basically it about the audio-video configuration. And lastly, and probably most interestingly, we have the layout configuration with which you can create, for example, clusters. So we have, let's just change the group ID. So the cool thing about the Ventuz configuration editor is that you can not only configure your local machine, but you can also configure every machine that is on the network, so that you have access to a whole cluster of machines that you don't need to access physically, but can access through just a simple laptop, for example. So when we start to create a layout for this, you can, for example, just make this for my local machine for now. So this is just now reading out all the information that it gets from the GPU driver. So when you have set up an Affinity group or a Mosaic group with your NVIDIA or AMD cards, it will just tell the Ventuz configuration editor how many displays it has and in which configuration. So if we don't have that right now, we can just create our own configuration for that. For example, we could use a video wall that has 4 displays in each row and 3 machines, and each machine will control exactly 1 row like this. And just by dragging and dropping them around in the right configuration, we can adjust our video wall setup, add bezels to them and all that, and as soon as we change anything and click save, it will be applied in real time to your video wall. So this is basically it about the layout configuration. You can apply this to a group of machines, to apply it to one machine cluster and at the same time, or you can just create it beforehand and then export it as a configuration file and import it whenever you in front of the video wall and have access to them. So lastly, let's have a look at projection mappings, because we had talked about this before in the beginning. We have also shaping editor. So whenever you have, for example, 2 HD projectors, you would like to have them overlap a little bit to create a soft edge, and then in the shaping editor you can adjust all those settings. So you can first apply them so that they fit on your projection screen, and change their or apply keystones to them in a 2x2, 3x3 or 5x5 grid to be able to adjust those changes to make it look correct on the specific screen. So once you're done with that, you can create edges, which will either have an automatic edge generation, or whenever you don't want to use that, you can just adjust the edges like you did with the something like that. With a general warping before. So this will just affect the soft edges and will create curves for dimming down all 3 color channels so that you have a very soft edge that the viewer will not see in the end. And lastly, you can just adjust the output in channel-wise in the colors so that it fits the screen as well. Again, all this is applied in real time, so you can make changes whenever you're in front of the projection. You can see it directly on your screen and thus can just work with a keyboard, for example, to move the keystones accordingly so that you're able to adjust all this pretty directly. Well, I think this is it about how to set up your machines for production. And also I think this closes this webinar because you now have a very good idea of the software suite and the general idea and concept behind those. You know about the solutions, about the basic license model. You know how to start with working with the Ventuz Designer, how the Ventuz Designer's UI works, how you create 3D scenes, 2D scenes, and how to create logics in there, how to make them interactive, how to use external data and work with 3D software that create geometries or meshes. And you also know how to deploy your project, what options you have, and how to start configuring all those using the configuration editor. So I think this is it. What I can show you as an overview.